Hello, and a very warm welcome to this 1.1 meditation session. My name is Els. For those of you who are new, let me give a little bit of a background to this project. These oneness sessions are organized by One Point Consulting, an IT consultancy company based in London. Several of us working for One Point have been meditating on a regular basis, some of us for many years now. The meditation we practice is called Raja Yoga. It's the yoga of the mind. My personal experience is that regular meditation is very helpful, as we are all living in a fast-changing world and are sometimes facing with many challenging situations. We had the thought that it might be a good idea to share some of these meditation practices with a wider audience, with the hope that others can also benefit from meditation. The Oneness project was launched in May 2020 in the middle of the COVID pandemic. It was a very difficult time for many people. So far, we have had more than 150 international guest speakers who have contributed to this project. These are experienced meditators from different cultural and professional backgrounds. The format of these sessions is a short talk about a particular topic with a short guided meditation. All the sessions have been recorded and they are available on YouTube. Today I'm very pleased to welcome Neville Hodgkinson, who joins us from Oxford in the UK. Neville is an author and journalist. He specialized for many of his career in writing about health and medicine, and he worked for more than 20 years as a medical and science correspondent for several national newspapers in the UK. He has written several books. Some of them include I Know How to Live, I Know How to Die, or These Are the Teachings of Dadi Janki. Another one was Will to Be Well, The Real Alternative Medicine. Neville was married for 25 years with Liz Hodgkinson. She's also an author and journalist. The couple have 2 sons and 5 grandchildren now. So Neville, I'm very pleased that you can be with us today. It was a very late invitation, which you kindly accepted. And the topic is very special, to know your true self, remove your headset. To know your true self, remove your headset. So thank you, Neville, and over to you.
Hello, thanks Els, and thanks to 1.1 for this invitation to share some thoughts on a topic that is of very great interest to me personally, actually. I love this idea that our brain and body can be likened to a kind of headset in a virtual reality game. And I want to just explore that a little bit. But Els was speaking about how fast-moving today's world is and seemingly inevitably stress-filled. But you must have noticed how some people are able to move through life, even circumstances that would break down most other people. Some manage to move through with lightness and ease, while others are at least uncomfortable and possibly really overstressed. And psychologists tell us that a key difference between the two is the degree of self-respect, or lack of it, in which we hold ourselves. This has become very, very evident in recent years with psychology, which looks not only to the negative as it used to do, but also the positive psychology that looks for what really makes us work well and live well in life. And not surprisingly, those who grow up in a loving and supportive environment tend to carry that love and support with them internally into adulthood. And in contrast to that, early trauma can leave us with an abiding, a lasting sense of insecurity. And there are people at the extremes of this. There's some who just sail through everything, and there's others who can hardly manage anything because they're so traumatized, they carry such burdens, but many of us somewhere on this spectrum in between. And the good news is that the latter group, those that seem to be making heavy weather of life, among which I would have included myself some years back before I started taking up some practices directed at overcoming that problem. The good news is that we can overcome our handicaps through making very conscious, positive choices in the way we think and feel and act. I learned this many years ago when I was first working as a medical correspondent. As mentioned by Els, I had a long career as a journalist in the newspaper world, working as a medical and science correspondent at different times. And I met doctors who could transform patients' lives by teaching them to have more respect for themselves and how to resist what one cardiologist called people poisoning. When we lack self-respect, we allow others to drag us down further through their own negativity or poison. When we lack the wisdom to see what's going on, we let that poison enter our own psyche. There's a constant exchange of energy between us, and someone whose battery of well-being and the self-respect attached to that is low becomes very vulnerable to this poison emitted by others who are not to be blamed, in the sense that they too are lacking in self-respect for a variety of reasons, maybe various forms of trauma in their own background, and they kind of unload that on others. But someone who's strong in their self-respect doesn't allow that poison to enter their system. One of the best examples of the dramatic improvements that can come about with wise, compassionate medical help was Louise Hay. Not actually a doctor, but she was founder of the hugely successful Hay House publishing company, which is still going today. And in the early 1980s, she was able to cure hundreds of young gay men from AIDS. And there are videos you can watch on YouTube of those early days when she did it. She filled them with love and an understanding of how the homophobic attitudes of the families and the societies that they'd grown up in the 50s and 60s and 70s had made them vulnerable to thinking and feeling and behaving in ways that were self-destructive and which damaged their immune system. My own healing has come about through a spiritual practice that has entailed spiritual understanding and meditation. And it brings an understanding that we are all sharing, as human beings, we all share love and wisdom at heart, but that these qualities become covered over with other more negative tendencies over the course of time. It includes an understanding of the continuity of consciousness, so that I might not have only had this one birth, I might have had many incarnations prior to this as a human being, and that over time, having started out my journey perhaps with that original clarity of consciousness and the love and wisdom that goes with it, over time, other things have clouded that cleanliness of outlook. And I relate to that. When I heard about this, I related to that understanding, and especially because I was being taught how you can escape the negativity and re-emerge your own higher self by connecting your mind to an eternal source of love and light, which is, you don't have to depend on other people. It's wonderful when someone like Louise Hay appears, and when some of the enlightened doctors that I met during my days as a medical correspondent were able to really lift patients who, like some who'd had devastating heart attacks, but they were able to assure them this is why it came about. You don't need to think that it will happen again if you understand yourself better and know how to protect yourself against this kind of event happening in future. So, but this, the beauty of the yoga and meditation that I've learned is that it asks you to understand and experience that there is a higher source, a higher power, rather like in the 12-step program that has been so successful in lifting many people with severe addictions out of their dependency, that there is this higher power and that we can connect our minds to it and draw on its strength in freeing ourselves of that lack of self-respect and the vulnerabilities that brings in us. So this source becomes accessible when it becomes more and more accessible, the more we actually disengage from our physical identity. That is, you don't have to leave the body, but you have to stop thinking yourself as primarily the material being who, if when we think of ourselves that way, it brings fear of loss, fear of destruction. If we're defining ourselves by our jobs, our income, the car we drive, the schools our children go to, all of those external things, they're all here today, gone tomorrow. And so they can set us up for stress. Whereas if you are drawing on this non-physical source from time to time, continuing with everyday life, but from time to time you're connecting to that higher power, you start to displace the negativities, which, as I was explaining, cover over the original beauty of the inner being. And over time, you can become more and more free of those dependencies and vulnerabilities that go with that lack of self-respect. What happens is that through meditation based on this kind of understanding, we learn how to step aside from the noise of the conditioning in our brains. You know, when you certain times when you've been deeply engaged with something and you've got a lot of worry connected with it, which is pretty natural because we have to use our brains and bodies for everyday life. But if you have the knack of understanding that that's just a role and not allowing it to be your whole be-all and end-all in life, if you can step aside from it from time to time and observe it, it doesn't have the same damaging effect on you, nothing like the same damaging effect on you as when you don't know how to step back in that way. The stepping back enables us to experience a deeper dimension of reality. And the healing power that then enters us is very great. It enables you to treat life more like a game. You become lighter and more giving in your relationships, because you're less needy, because you're meeting your own needs for yourself. So you become lighter and less needy. You must have seen how, although it's true that some people who do very well in business may have a certain psychopathic tendencies, so it's said, but there are others who have so many qualities that allow them to rise to high positions, high executive roles, and fulfill major responsibilities with a certain lightness. They sometimes call themselves players. They have that sense so that they can treat all of life as a game. Their identity isn't totally invested in the role, and hence, but more in the soul, which is the inner being, and hence they can withstand knocks that someone who doesn't understand themselves in that deeper way would find devastating. So yes, I've experienced this change in my own lightness of being. I've been quite a slow learner, I think partly because I had a very materialistic outlook previously. And I was reluctant to believe something just because it felt good. That element in me that liked science and admired science and wanted to write about science because of its efforts to get at truth in a really clear way, it made me reluctant to believe something just because it felt good. But then I've been, more recent years, I was very much helped in this path of shifting my sense of who I am to this deeper space by work such as that of Professor Donald Hoffman. You might have come across him. There's lots of videos of his work on interviews with him. He's a delightful fellow on YouTube. He's a cognitive neuroscience in the USA, and he maintains that the real world comprises what he calls conscious agents, which is actually very much in line with spiritual understanding. You know, conscious agents, in effect, are these non-physical entities which he is maintaining are putting on the show, which we then experience in the physical world. So the physical world, in his way of thinking, is rather like a virtual reality game, a simulation. He says consciousness is first, matter and fields depend on it for their very existence. So consciousness is first. There's a program, a source code behind the material world that is putting on this show, and we are actors within it. We have the headset of the brain and body that allows us to negotiate the game. And if you say to him, well, if you're saying it's kind of really just almost unreal, then what would you say to someone? They're lying on a railway track and there's a train thundering down towards them. He says, you get up and get off the track, because otherwise you'll be out of the game. So, but even so, there's an element in his way of thinking that invites us to understand that the human spirit as a conscious agent itself has much more potential than we have realized. That I have already discovered through the kind of changes that I've been describing to. So this is where the headset referred to in the title of this talk comes in. Virtual reality headsets give users an experience of a computer-generated 3D environment. That's what they are. I'm sure many of you will have tried them. They're responsive to eye and head movements. So according to the movements that you're making, you will get taken into different experiences, moving through a simulated world. And in Hoffman's way of thinking, our head and brain, and in fact the whole body, is comparable to such a headset. It's what enables us to experience life in the 3D world of time and space. But we don't actually originate in that 3D world. We originate outside it, and we come into the game of the 3D world. He's working on a maths that he says, very interestingly in some of his recent interviews, a mathematics which he claims he and fellow researchers are really starting to get to grips with the code that is putting on the show within space-time, within our 3D world. It's a complex mathematics that, but they're getting there, and so watch that space. He believes that's the code for the game of life that takes place within space-time. There's supportive evidence for this way of thinking. I'm sure you'll have heard of the near-death experiences. Thousands have been reported in recent years because of advances in resuscitation. When people die clinically, and they often, very often, when they're resuscitated, describe having left their bodies, having encountered a realm of expanded consciousness, in which they may meet other conscious agents, as referred to by Hoffman. But above all, they get a sense of being a part of a whole, that consciousness, in some sense, is one, even though we're individuated within it. They get a sense of that connectedness and the love and wisdom that is present within that field of consciousness. So when they come back, their lives are often really transformed. They feel as if my God, you know, what was I doing, rushing around, ruining myself, my health and my happiness by being so driven? Let me chill. Let me enjoy this game. Let me not be so driven to prove myself in those limited ways. And subsequently, even though they might not be so ego-driven and hardworking in one sense, but often there's more success in life because of the clarity and the discrimination power and the judgment that comes with that more cool state of being. So yes, the NDEs, and there was a very interesting study at Oxford University of the effect of psilocybin on the brain. Psilocybin is the active ingredient in magic mushrooms, made famous by the hippies of the Welsh Valleys long ago. Back in the 60s, they were famous. And I've never tried it myself, although it's a very tempting sounding thing. It gives a sense, something similar to what the near-death experience people describe, this cosmic oneness, this sense of being freed from the limitations of our ordinary existence, and a very, very blissful experience often. And the scientists wanted to know which part of the brain, because most neurologists believe that consciousness is entirely a product of the brain. They want to know which part of the brain is producing these lovely experiences. And so they got some student volunteers, probably wasn't too difficult to find them, and they put them into scanners that would show which parts of the brain were changing in their activity, lighting up or whatever, as the effects of the drug, measured doses of the drug, began to work through the brain. And to their surprise, they found that with this particular drug, psilocybin, no particular part of the brain lit up. Instead, what they called key connector hubs in the brain shut down. So it was as if the spirit was being released from what would previously bind it into the headset. It's so interesting. So again, further evidence that consciousness is something wider and deeper than we've been thinking of it as. Certainly far more than, of course, our brains affect our consciousness. Hit me on the head with a hammer, it will change my consciousness. There's all sorts of drugs that can change my consciousness. My consciousness changes all the time as a result of my responses to outside circumstances. But that doesn't mean I am my brain. It doesn't mean that I am not anything much deeper, more that it points to the idea that I am something distinct from my brain, but when I come and use my brain, it acts as a filter that allows me to negotiate life. So I come out of that undifferentiated oneness to play my part here on the stage of the world. This is the way the understanding is beginning to shape among the scientists as well as among spiritual seekers. So you do need the headset, but we also need to be able to take it off from time to time. And that's where meditation and contemplation can come in. When I learn, and I can, this is really the essence of what I've learned through my own meditation study, it's called Raja Yoga. When I learn to take off the headset of the brain and the body, it's as if I experience the core of my being much more readily. And I experience that core of my being is benevolent. And I totally believe this, that every human soul has benevolence at its core. And the reason we find ourselves behaving so badly so often is because we've lost sight of that beautiful inner being. Negative aspects emerge when I identify with the material world, what I look like, how much I earn, all the rest of it, and get lost in the game. And then I become like those patients that I saw, cardiologists in London, helping to realize how they had been on a path of self-destruction, and as Louise Hay did with the AIDS patients. So you see the difference between you learn to see the difference between this far-reaching consciousness of the inner being and the narrow consciousness that the headset gives me. It's not that that's wrong. I need it to negotiate life, to play the game, but I'm wrong to identify with that limited being. That's the key message. It's a great field of discovery. There are many scientists working in this field now. They call it the consciousness-based paradigm, as opposed to the matter-based paradigm. And another term for it is post-materialist science. And it actually connects with a long tradition of esoteric understanding, that the material world is not as it seems. And it's also supported by quantum theory, which says the same. I think I've time to just quote you one or two. The founders of quantum theory were astonished at what they were discovering about the real nature of reality, you know, underneath the apparent obvious material things that we think that we understand. Max Planck, often considered the father of quantum physics, all matter originates and exists only by virtue of a force. We must assume behind this force is the existence of a conscious and intelligent mind. This mind is the matrix of all matter. And you remember that first movie, of this Matrix series, just brilliant in capturing this idea, not a benevolent mind, but the mind of those computers that were running the Matrix. So James Jeans, another top English physicist, the stream of knowledge, this is also from the 1930s, a book called The Mysterious Universe. The stream of knowledge is heading towards a non-mechanical reality. The universe begins to look more like a great thought than a great machine. Mind no longer appears as an accidental intruder into the realm of matter. We're beginning to suspect that we ought rather to hail it as a creator and governor of the realm of matter. So this was back in the 30s, but science has been so wedded to the materialistic model that it didn't face up to the real implications of quantum theory until recently. And now, even today's conventional physics, orthodox physics, says that you don't get a particle without the information that allows it to manifest from the quantum field. That's orthodox physics. So where that information comes from, you know, that's not a question that they care to look at the moment. But the consciousness-based paradigm being addressed by people like Donald Hoffman is pointing to this realm of conscious agents, of which we are included in that. So I would just conclude by saying that leading philosophers today are realizing that something about this materialistic way we've been living for so long has depleted human consciousness to the extent that we're just not seeing our way out of the problems that we face, you know, socially, environmentally, financially, politically. There's a mess, a major mess. One of the best commentators on this is Ian McGilchrist, and he's so interesting. He's the author of The Master and His Emissary, a book about the differential functions of the two halves of the brain, but he's pointing towards our need to connect to the divine in order to get ourselves out of this mess. I'll just read you a quote. He says, "We are the most miserable people that have ever existed in the time that we've been measuring it. We privilege autonomy and end up bound by rules to which we never assented and more spied on than any people since the beginning of time. We pursue leisure through technology and discover that the average working day is longer than ever and that we have less time than we had before. Nowadays, things that used to be solvable with a 5-minute telephone call can involve loops in which one goes round and round something on the internet for a few hours before giving up and trying to find a telephone number where one talks to somebody in probably the subcontinent of Asia who has an algorithm to follow and therefore answers in the way that a machine would answer. So it is not surprising that we get stressed out. So we really do, in such a world, we really do need to kind of take ourselves in hand and look at this beautiful possibility that we can escape the matrix, at least briefly, and with the strength that we get from stepping back, come back into it and play our parts better and help others to escape from the matrix too. Okay, so I'll just finish with a couple of minutes of a meditation, the kind of thought that goes through my mind when I'm attempting to take off that headset, which I needed to wear while I'm sharing some of these things, but which, if I just now come into an inner awareness, I can briefly put it on one side and invite you to do the same. Taking it off involves stillness. It involves appreciating just how beautiful each one of us is. It involves recognizing that we lost sight of that beauty, all of us to different degrees, but now it feels as if it's the time to regain that inner strength, to see us through critical times. The strength comes from realizing that there is a dimension beyond matter. It's been referred to historically as the divine. We can know it. It just requires the discipline of stillness, not forever, which would be death, but stepping back to engage with the inner being and the supreme source of the highest consciousness, which, when we remember that one, that kind of sun of knowledge, that light of wisdom and ocean of love, our own inner being is restored to its truth. And when I practice this, even for a minute or two, here and there in the day, it will make a big difference to the way I play the game, even when I'm wearing the headset. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Neville. A very beautiful meditation commentary. I really liked how you started by saying it's time to regain our inner strength by taking off that headset. And you explained that that means re-emerging my true identity, disengaging from my physical identity or not over-identifying with the material world and connecting with the eternal source of love and light. So thank you, Neville. It was really beautiful. For those of you who have joined us today, I hope you have enjoyed this session, and we're looking forward to welcoming you again to the next 1.1 session. Also, thanks to the technical team who always support us behind the scenes. Okay, bye-bye everyone, and have a nice day.